Hello, so today we're going to continue on with the Python tutorial and we're going to talk about if statements today. Now if statements are vital for any sort of programming, irrelevant if it's Python, it's used everywhere and it's kind of the core function of programming. It allows you to specify different paths for different code to be executed depending on the input you receive. So the best way to learn Python is to actually just jump in and start writing stuff. So we're in our project that we made before when we were installing Python and debugging in Python, debugging in PyCharm. That's our YouTube tut. And I've made another file, so if you just do file, if you just click here, right click, new, Python file, enter the name you want. I did if underscore statements and it generated me this file. Just bear in mind you want new Python, and that gives you the .py ending at the end of it. So let's just jump in and build something. So I want to make a program that when a user inputs a number, it works out whether that number is even or odd, and it prints it to the console. So we're going to use a keyword called input, and that allows us to input values into the console. So we'll just say enter number, and then we want to store that into a number variable. So that takes the user's input and puts it into a variable. Now, once we have that input, we then want to cast that into an integer because it's taking it in right now as a string. And so what we're doing here is we're taking that value that would otherwise be a string, casting it to an integer, so saying convert this to an integer and overwriting the previous value on it. So that way it's a really convenient way of overwriting old variables, so you don't have to make new variables. You can just overwrite the old value, which was a string, and overwrite it to a casted number. Cool, so we got that, and then we now start with an if statement. So we'll have to say something like if our number is divisible, or remainder, 2. So we're saying here, if our number modulo 2, so is this number divisible by 2, and if so, how many remainders does it leave? So before we worked in idle to write Python code to test concepts out, but we can write it here now. So PyCharm comes with its own Python console, which is in the bottom tabs, which you can open up. So if we say something like 10 modulo 2, you can see the remainder is 0. So since we know that number's even and can be evenly divided into 2, it will leave no remainders. So what we can say is, if the output of this is equal to 0, then print, and you can see where just before I did the colon and press enter, it auto indents. So the way normal programming languages work is they do something like this. If blah, open bracket, open curly brace, close curly brace, and you would write your code up in that. That's where normal coding usually works along those methods, but Python's different. And so you don't need to use curly braces. If something is indented in something, then it's considered to run in that code block. So if it's indented, so let's say I put some stuff here, everything indented within everything there belongs to this. So if this if statement is true, let's say this output's true, it's going to run everything in this block because it's indented and belongs to this. So think of it as like a tree-like structure. You have the root here, and then these are the branches. Or think of it as this is the branch, these are the leaves. It's sort of tree-like, that this is nested within this. Yeah? Okay, so if this is true, so if the top if statement is true, then we'll print is even. Now we want to put an else here, saying else. Now if num modulo 2 is not equal to 0, then we'll print out something like is odd, because it's not even, it must be odd. And so if we run this, and if I just right click on the page and click run if statements, you can see it prompts us for to enter input. So if we say 20 is even, and then if I do something like 35, you can see it says it's odd. So you get a good understanding of what's actually going on. And because we did the debug tutorial, we can actually debug and actually look at each line of execution. So if we right click again and then click debug, same file name, you can see we stop here, and if we step into the next line, you can see our program hangs here because we're entering input. And if the user doesn't enter input, the program just hangs. So let's do something like 10. You can see it moves on to the next line. We can see our input here is you can see the string str, and then as we step down, you can see it gets converted into an integer, so int. Then we go into this first case statement, 10 modulo 2, that's true, so we go into that, is even, and we print that out. You can see it looks a bit messy here, but that's because of the debug environment sometimes messes up the print order, but otherwise everything works fine. So let's talk a little bit about operators. So operators are used in if statements all the time, and they produce a binary output. So we're going to use the Python console to look at operators. So if statements heavily depends on operators. So we have the common type that we just seen is the equal sign. So if we say 0 is equal to 0, that's true. So that produces a Boolean output saying true or false. And so the equal sign is a way of just saying, is this value equal to this value? And you can think of it, well, you can have different variations of it. So obviously that would be true, but if you had something like this, that would be false. Now you can also put negators in, so something like 1. This basically says 1 is not equal to 1, which is false because 1 does equal 1. And so if we do something like this, it comes out true. You have inequalities, so you can have bigger than or smaller than, so let's say something like this. 1 is smaller than 2, that's a true statement. 2 is smaller than 1, that's a false statement. 2 is larger than 1, that's a true statement, and you get the general idea. You can also have inequalities attached to these, you can also have equalities attached to inequalities. So for example, if you have something like this, you're saying 2 is equal to, 2 is bigger than or equal to 2, which is true, because 2 is equal to 2, and yeah, so your 2 is bigger than or smaller than, 2 is bigger than but smaller and equal to 3, which is false. 2 is bigger than or equal to 1, which is true. And obviously you can have it for the other way around. Like that. You can also have AND operations. So let's say you have something like 1 equals 1 and 1 equals 2. So what AND does is it looks at any operator and on either of its sides. If any of them equal true, if any of them equal false, it will flat out output false. And if you have a true and a true on either side and everything's true, then it will output a true. So for example, if I change that back to 2, you can see it's true. And you also have an OR operator. So if we have something, so what OR does is it looks on either side. If any of the operators are true, then it will output true, irrelevant of any other condition. If any of them are at least true, it will output true. But if they're all false, then it outputs a false. And if either one of them is true, then it will just output a true. Like so. And finally you have the not operation. So this is like a negator. It's pretty much equal to, they're pretty much the same. So if we say not 1, you would think this would be false, right? 1 is equal to 2. That isn't the case, but because we put a not in front, it has turned it into true. This would be true, but because a not is in front, it's turned to false. Like so. Okay, so in the same window, let's comment this code out. So one thing you can do to comment out code is just to go code here, and then do comment with line comment. Or you can do control // but for some reason on my keyboard it's not really working right now. So you can get rid of that for the time being. And we're just going to make a new program, or write a new piece of code to understand how else if statements work. So if we do something like make a list first, so class underscore 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 2, 3, let's change that to 6, 7, 8, 9, and let's get rid of the last one. Let's turn this to 10, turn this to 11, let's turn this to 12, 13, and I don't think we need that. Okay, so we want to get input from the user. So the program we're trying to make is to work out whether someone belongs to a certain class based on the input the person has given us. So if we are given the input 10, we will say that we are in class number 3, and we'll just look at how we'll go about building that. So if we go number and then we cast that into an integer because it's a string as input. Now if we say if number is in class 1, so as in the number we've added or entered is in class 1, then I want you to print out in class underscore 1. Now here's where the new part comes in. You can use something called elif, which is like else if. So if the first statement is not true and you want a bit more checking on your second statement, you can use an else if. So we can say number is in class 2, print in class underscore 2. And again, you can use it again. So else if number in class 3, print class in class underscore 3. And then finally we can add an else statement here, like we don't know what to do. I know I use double quotes here because the single quote, if I use that, I wouldn't be able to use this single quote here for the apostrophe and don't. So what will happen is the program will run. We'll then jump. Where's the mouse? We'll jump here, and then this will be false or true, whatever the case is. And if that's the case, then we'll move on to this line and move on to this line. And if they're all false, we'll move on to our else statement. So that's kind of like you cover all avenues of possible options. So if we start debugging the code, actually let's just run the code and see what happens. So let's say I enter number 10. I'm in class 3. Okay, so let's now debug the code. Yeah, so we have to enter the user's input, and we entered it here of the number 10. We then cast that number, which we do here, and convert that to a 10, as you can see there. Then we then go into these if statements. We then check if it's in class 1, no, class 2, no, class 3, yes. And then we go into that and print that out. So let's try that again, but with a different number. Let's try 200. I don't know why I entered 20,000 instead. I guess it's got over happy with the 0 key. So yeah, go down, go down, go down, go down, and then obviously none of these cases work for us, so we just go into our else statement and we print out I don't know. Cool. Okay, so this pretty much covers if statements for now. I'll see you in the next tutorial. Bye bye.